Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Not here to make you happy, not here to make you sad. Your feelings are irrelevant when debates are to be had. The Belfast Bapcast, loud and clear, covering the topics others fear, Working overtime to bring you many stories, waking up today the same Labour and Tories. A stage, it isn't our part to play, is bringing you knowledge in this way. No filter, no fuss, just tell unfiltered fact, much like the words on those Christian tracks.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Belfast Bapcast, episode 40. And today we're joined by Guy Anderson. Now, he isn't your average conspiracy theorist hiding in a basement. He's a former Freemason who got inside the walls most people only whisper about and came out, saying the whole system's rotten to the core. Born in Cambridge in 1971 to a master mason with an obsession for Egypt, Stephen Hawking, and the guy was raised in a house where science and secrets went hand in hand. He joined the Grand Lodge of London himself, then started to notice things that didn't add up, rituals that didn't feel symbolic anymore, and power that didn't feel human. That's when he started digging, and he's been digging ever since. So his books, Tesla and Cabbage Patch Kids and Rise of the Clones, don't just question history, they rip it apart. He argues that a global civilization, Tartaria, was wiped from the record in a deliberate reset around 1776, that we've been repopulated, cloned and programmed ever since. That Tesla wasn't just a genius inventor, he was silenced for discovering how to break the system that runs the world now. On his YouTube channel, Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, Guy blends suppressed science, ancient tech, and biblical prophecy into one terrifying, coherent picture. So he talks about the elite's obsession with control, the re-engineering of humanity, and the spiritual battle underneath it all. So he's not here to be liked. He's not here to make you question everything. But he's here to make you question the core stuff. So the Belfast Bapcast is not here to make you comfortable, and these are exactly the sort of conversations you like. So welcome, Guy.
Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. So absolutely fascinating research that you do. So tell us just a wee bit, first of all, about where you're from and what shaped you growing up in the Masonic household and taking your interest in stuff. And
well, my dad started me on this journey. He'd been reading books that just went against the mainstream narrative on history from a very young age. He was probably in his mid-20s when he started reading these kind of books, and I followed suit. So in my mid-teens, I started reading the same books. He encouraged me to question everything. And I knew he was a Freemason, but I didn't really know that much about it. But all I remember is my mum used to joke whenever he left to go to a lodge meeting with his briefcase wearing a morning suit, that he was off with his friends to put their aprons on and start baking cakes. And he'd always laugh and say, it doesn't really matter what you think about Freemasonry because they run the world and they don't care what you think. And that fascinated me. And one day I was able to crack open the lock on his briefcase, and I found his apron, I found these books, and I couldn't make head nor tail of them, and he wouldn't share anything with me. So I had to wait until I was ready in his mind to join so I could find out what he knew. And that really, I suppose, helped my understanding of how organizations like Freemasonry work. But at the same time, it didn't answer the questions I was hoping it would. So I had to then find, I suppose, the answers in other books, because it was pretty clear, even after I'd progressed, having been in for about 10 years, not being that far away from what they call the worshipful master, which it's progressive. So after a period of time, everybody gets to spend a year running the lodge, if you like, but they don't really. The secretary runs the lodge and they stay in situ. But it's your turn in the chair. And I realised that it didn't really matter how high up I got. I was never going to be able to get high up enough to find out what really went on, because that's a closed shop. That's not open to people like me. So in the end, I gave up. And as much as I found it interesting, and I met some really lovely people there, I also saw it as quite corrupt, because where I was based is right next to Scotland Yard. So there was a lot of police there, and there are a lot of police in the London lodges. And often that some joined for the right reasons and some joined to progress their career. And I witnessed that. And it became a very cliquey kind of old boys club. And that's not what it was supposed to be in my mind. It was people working together for a common goal, and that was to raise money for charity, to support each other when they're in need. And that was how I was introduced to it. Now, don't get me wrong, there are people that join specifically to raise money, but there are also people that join because they're lonely. So a lot of older people join that are widowers, and they want to open up their social circle. But it didn't
Yeah.
answer the questions that I had. And in the end, I threw the towel in. And now, having talked about them and said, shared my disappointment with with my experience, at least, I wouldn't be welcome back anyway. But for me, I've moved on because I found that the information I want is available in other places if you look hard
Yeah.
enough.
Well, that's the thing about information. I mean, there's endless amounts of it. It's just about looking for the right stuff. And obviously, with the whole Tartaria side of things, it's such a rabbit hole. I stumbled across it maybe 3 or 4 years back, and there's so many offshoots from it. The World Fairs, the Cabbage Patch Kids, the orphans trains, and you've went deep into research on these topics. I mean, I've only sort of surface level, so I'm really intrigued to pick your brain on them. So, in regards to just sort of give a bit of a broad overview as the concept of the 1776 reset, and then we'll go from there.
Well, it's kind of Tartaria, I realised quite quickly, isn't a rabbit hole, it's a warren, because it connects everything. And the reason that is because it was a civilization that was wiped out. They literally removed all traces of their existence from history. And this was done by the Jesuits. And it took a long time, about 200 years, of slowly infiltrating every single library, business, home, anybody that was running technology that was advanced. Everything was infiltrated, and the information was either destroyed or suppressed. In some cases, it was bought, and then people were disposed of. So Tartaria is, I suppose it's a blanket term. We're really talking about an area of land. It's Eastern Europe, Russia, and Asia. But it spun across the Northern Hemisphere, and then it sort of echoed across the earth into every town and city. But they were working, I suppose, in a similar way to the Atlanteans did. They were harnessing energy from the ether. So they had, a better understanding of how to generate clean and free energy. And this is something that Nikola Tesla spent his life trying to reverse engineer, if you like. So when you look into Tartaria, you suddenly find out about population anomalies, suppression of history, the rewriting of history books and maps. Then you've got, obviously, Nikola Tesla with the technology, and then the introduction of, I suppose, the British Empire and the new civilization, the New World, a New World Order through indoctrination via world's fairs and expositions. So it was a mass whitewash and brainwash exercise that did happen across the world. And lots of civil wars took place. There were outbreaks, pandemics, genocide, famine, the introduction of the Lunacy Act, prisons being open officially, asylums and orphanages across the world as well. In places where
You
The
you, you
Lunacy
mentioned
Act.
that was enacted to take kids off mothers who had lost the fathers during war times. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, I mean that was basically any woman that was able to conceive or already had was targeted. So if you look at the Lunacy Act, having problems with your menopause or having problems with your menstrual cycle, experiencing period pains, or hormones causing, I suppose, issues, where we would say, I suppose, they're hormonal, which is a derogatory term. I understand that, but it was targeting anybody that had kids or could. So the Lunacy Act ensured that if you had lost your husband in battle, you were considered insane and unfit to be able to parent your child or children alone without him. And so you were automatically sent to an asylum. The children become property of the state, and then they can use those children to repopulate by distributing them to certain countries to start again. So yeah, it was very important, that very important part of the process.
And so many old photos you look at and around that time, everywhere just seems to be children, doing all different types of manual labor, and yeah, it's insane. But sorry, going ahead, I interrupted your flow there.
Well, I suppose with regard to that, miners is probably the most obvious example, because if you look at old mining photographs, you'll just see children. And I believe that that's where the word came from, miners, because it was kids, it was miners actually doing the work. And then you got, the workhouses and people working on the in the mills and so on. It's always children. Where are the adults? In all of these images, it's just children working. Well, the adults surely had to be working somewhere, but where? There's no sign of them. So it was because most had been either committed or killed. And then they had wars that took place just to wipe out the population. So like the Napoleonic Wars, where people that survived wrote, left letters and diaries saying that, when the smoke cleared or the dust settled, we realized that we were fighting against an army that was wearing the same uniform as us. We'd been killing each other. And so they sort of, the parasites, as I call them, sat back and watched us do this to ourselves, to kill each other. And as a result, between 1776, when New World Order began, some people would call it Satan's little season. From the start of that until 1876, 100 years later, 3.35 billion people died. And it left a population of 1.35 billion. I mean, that's staggering. To have destroyed an empire and wiped out 2/3 of the people on Earth just shows what they're happy and comfortable to do.
Yes,
Just to start
absolute
again.
bloodlust, isn't it?
Yes, I think they still have that very much today.
100%. They're always angling towards some form of mass human sacrifice in the form of war. And the Jesuits, as you earlier mentioned, always seem to have a hand in it somewhere, may it be through intelligence agencies or different positions in government. Or
yeah, I mean, they very much pull the strings. People think that the person in charge of the Vatican is the man wearing the white, with occasionally a red pair of shoes on, and that we see on the balcony every now and again. It's not. There's the white Pope, then there's the black Pope, and sat at the top is the grey Pope, and that's the head of the Jesuit order. Right now, that's someone called Pepe Orsini. That's a Rothschild family, and they're very much the Rothschilds. They might change their names in certain situations, and over the years they've changed their name, but it is that family that run everything, from banking to who sits on the throne. Absolutely everything is ultimately controlled by that one bloodline.
yes, and it's an insane web of power, and these names just continue to pop up throughout history, whether it be Rothschild, Orsini, or Rockefeller or DuPont, or
I mean,
all
DuPont,
the
they're a
different
brilliant
forms.
example of poisoning people. Yeah, it is. They changed their names, like, Tom Hanks is a Rothschild, the Bush is a Rothschild, Winston Churchill was. And after the Napoleonic Wars, the deal was, in exchange for bailing out the royal family to fight in the war, which was already pretty much over by the time the royal family were told that they needed more money and more people to fight. It was already pretty much done and dusted by then. But regardless, they convinced Britain that this is the Rothschilds, that they needed more people, they needed more soldiers and more money to finance that. The deal was that they weren't bothered about the repayment terms and how long the debt took to be repaid. They wanted to cede whoever sat on the throne from that point on. And the first was Queen Victoria. That was the first Rothschild to sit on the throne of Britain. But of course, the whole royal family, they're imposters. They've got no right really to be sat on a British throne when they don't descend from Britain, and it's just rape and pillage, with better techniques than other people. But this particular family do believe that they've got a God-given right to rule over all of us, and that goes all the way back to Amun-Ra. When Ra left everything behind to his children, that slowly became known as the Rothschilds. That it goes back so far that there's no chance we're ever going to be able to remove that mentality from these people. They just believe that they have a divine right to rule us and that we are vermin to them.
I think as well, though, from a Christian perspective, like the research side of it, you can get yourself lost in sort of intellectual masturbation too, and you're never going to answer all the questions, and if it doesn't, if inquest or inquiry doesn't end in repentance and finding the Father, then what is the point in it all? If from a Christian perspective, and obviously there's many other perspectives, but that's how I view the world. And I've noticed myself in certain subjects, I go so far, it's like, is this intentional? Am I intentionally losing myself just in research? It almost feels like a bad spirit as opposed to an inquisitive one. That sort of takes over your life at times.
Yeah, tell me about it. I mean, since I started researching Tartaria, that's all I do now. I talk about it, I write about it, I blog about it, and it's taken over my life. And people say, well, they're into Antarctica, they're into the moon landings, 9/11, whatever it is. But this is the biggest conspiracy of them all. Not only does it connect so many of them, but to wipe out an entire civilization and start again is the biggest, surely, act of what would the word be? Almost satanic, isn't
messianic. It's a messianic complex,
Yeah.
if not satanic. So just to paint the picture, the orphan trains and the Cabbage Patch Kids. I mean, that's a pretty dark period. So
Yeah.
if you could just describe that for us.
Yeah, so through the Lunacy Act and the fact that so many children became orphans, and that was because, in addition to the people that fell, the men that fell during the wars, because there were civil wars and obviously the Napoleonic Wars, but the civil wars took place everywhere, all around the same period of time. So you ended up with a lot of children roaming the streets, and that was obviously strategic. So they used the orphan train movement to ship them across America to start again, because most of America had been wiped out. And a lot of children were also sent to Australia. But a lot of children from Russia were dispatched as well. And my mother's father was one of them. He came from Crimea on a boat with his sister to America, and then ended up in Pennsylvania, and still have family living there now. And this was a kind of blank sheet where they could say, well, this is the history. You're now going to speak English. This is the religion you're going to follow. Everything else that you might have heard isn't true. And you get to start again. But that didn't give them enough children. It's estimated that 250,000 children were moved from New York as they arrived in the docks, were then shipped to Midwest America to work on farms and mines. But most people believe that you can double that. So we've probably got about 500,000 kids in America starting a new life with a new name. And of course, at the same time, they were taking children from indigenous communities and whitewashing them as well, and considering them as sort of primitive and savage in many respects, because they weren't following Christianity and their beliefs meant nothing. They were even beaten if they didn't speak with an English accent. So if there was even a trace of an accent that didn't meet the new narrative, that was beaten out of them. But then comes the Cabbage Patch children, and that is a very, very growing, very much a growing belief that they repopulated as well by cloning. And this
Yeah.
took place in Germany. And this was an attempt to repopulate with Tartarian children. And these were Tartars and Aryans. Tartarians, and the Aryans going back to Atlantis. So they had this sort of, I suppose, divine spark that they many believed they were a higher level of intelligence, that they carried the secrets in their DNA of sacred geometry and so on, and how cymatics and frequency work, that this was inbuilt in them. And so they formed something called kindergartens, where they were allegedly growing children in underground bases. These later became DUMBs, the deep underground military bases, and they were reproducing at a rapid rate, and these were then put on sale and on display through places that had World Fair exhibitions and
Incubator
incubators.
babies.
Yeah, the incubator babies. Yeah, so they were actually put on display through those. And people will say, well, cloning can't be that old. But of course, if you read Genesis, you'll see that even in there, it's stating that one life was created by the rib of another. And before we had the technology we do now, that the removing a rib was the easiest way to actually be able to clone. But now we can do it a lot easier than that. People have pets cloned all the time, and apparently it's been going on in Hollywood and a company called CloneAid in Canada for some time. But if we look at the I suppose the earliest text we have that talks about this, it would be the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Emerald Tablets that explain that another race of beings far more superior to us came here, messed around with what was the Neanderthal, and with a tweak of DNA turned the Neanderthal into what we are, and a slave race with an obey gene that would do what it's told, with its lifespan capped at 120 years. Now that is, as far as I'm aware, that's the oldest version of that story that we have, that we see in the Old Testament, because the Epic of Gilgamesh also has the Great Flood in it, but it's someone other than Noah, and so it's all kind of there, and then it's repeated. So if that story is true, then or the story in Genesis is
I'm
true,
not
then the
sure. Did you
ability
see
to make
the
life.
Billy Carson and Wes Hoff interview
Sorry, did
around
I see?
that? I'd see Billy Carson and Wesley Hoff's interview around the Epics of Gilgamesh and ancient
No.
texts, etc. So the guy Wesley Hoff is an actual biblical historian and also a document historian, and he was able to tear most of that to shreds as early like it's been put off as forgeries, etc. And then like other things that Billy Carson would use, like the Gospel of Thomas and stuff, like also well-known forgeries. So it's one of those things that people have said a lot, but when you dig beneath the surface, there's not actually validity behind it. It sounds masterful.
I would have
So,
I would have thought, to be able to pull that apart, he would have had to have gone to the Vatican vaults and been shown some incredibly sensitive documents, because I'm guessing that we know that the Bible has been bastardized, and we know that they've left books out. Perhaps the most famous would be the Book of Enoch and the second Book of Enoch. So to be able to disprove something, you would have to have access to information that just isn't available to most people. Because my guess is that the only people that really know the truth and why certain things are missed out of the Bible and why it's badly translated and why, for example, in the Old Testament, God is plural and then goes to a singular in the New Testament. The only people that really know the truth of that surely would be the Vatican. And of course, for every person out there that, like Billy Carson, that puts this information, or Zachariah Sitchin that puts this information out there, there'll be people who debunk it. But I'm kind of one of these people that until I see it for myself, I can believe something, but I can't state it as being factual. But whoever this person is, who I don't know their name, but if they're debunking Billy Carson, the only way they'd surely be able to do that is if they
It
had
wasn't
access.
from a it wasn't from a debunking point of view. They were on a podcast together, and it brought up sort of different texts and different. It was the Gospel of Thomas, and he said about the Epics of Gilgamesh, and your guy it went sort of viral for a while there. He very eloquently just sort of put him in his box, and Billy Carson went very irate at 1 a.m. in the morning to the podcast hoster's house to ask that he wouldn't post the footage because it was so embarrassing.
Oh my God. So I need to have a watch of that. I'm sort of on the fence with Billy Carson. I've got to say, I was quite impressed when I first started watching him.
Well, so was I.
Well, I've said this a few times over the years that more recently, the images of him when he's with the pyramids and he's with his wife or partner, they kind of look like they've just walked off a red carpet. So somewhere along the line, he's become incredibly wealthy. But I don't know whether or not he's got an agenda, whether or not he's being got at, because a lot of these people, I suppose, have. I don't think you can get to a certain level without somebody somewhere intervening. But no, I'm very firmly, because we know that the Emerald tablets were carbon dated. So we know that, we know the age of them. The only issue with carbon dating is that it starts at a point that was put in place by the Vatican. And so if that date is wrong, then it throws everything else out. But I'm still very much leaning towards that. It's the oldest we have. We don't have anything older. And of course, you can say, well, this document I've read or this. How do we know anything that we look at is true?
Yeah, well, that's the point I come from. Like, it's in the end, every intellectual outlook does come down to an element of faith, So for anyone to stand on a pedestal and make fun of a Christian, for example, or make fun of a Muslim or whatever for having faith, or everybody has to have faith ultimately, unless they're doing the facts, the figures, and the crunching of the data themselves. Because at the end of the day, we're all believing what guy we don't know has written in a book. So.
Yeah, all we know is that we don't have access to so much information that I think we have a right to see. And who has given people that kind of decision? Who made the decision that we don't deserve it, that we can't know the truth? And I think at some point it's all going to come out. But for me, as a youngster, I never really believed the Bible. I thought it was mass brainwashing, that we had two options, really. We believed in Darwin's theory of evolution, his work on the origin of species, or we believed the Bible, that some supreme being created us in their image. And it's as I've gotten older, and I've also investigated Charles Darwin and saw that the Vatican financed his research so they could have control of the alternative narrative. Better to be in control of the alternative story than to have someone throw it at you as a curved ball.
And Lucifer, their telescope.
I'm sorry?
Their telescope called Lucifer as well.
Lucifer? Yeah. Have you seen the building it's in, the room it's in? I mean, that's a snake's head as well.
Yeah.
So I think, I'm not a fan of Billy Carson. I'm not a supporter of him. I've questioned him. I've actually come out on a couple of podcasts and said that I think he's been got at. and now he's too
I
showy
think
for my liking.
anyone like Alex Jones, Billy Carson, anyone who is allowed to get to a level of financial gain in their field and like sort of renowned in their field, they're got at, you know.
Yeah, but I'm
Um,
very much still. I find the Epic of Gilgamesh. I think everybody should read that. If they're a follower of the Bible, I mean, unfortunately, the one that we most, I suppose, have as being most popular would be the King James Bible, and we know that that was rewritten in a way in which it suggested that the king was God's choice to rule, and of course, the Crown still owned the copyright, so they're probably making money still today from the sales of King James Bibles. Um, if anyone's interested in that, then the Epic of Gilgamesh is certainly worth listening to. But the Book of Thomas, the Book of Giants, the Book of Enoch, Jubilees, and so on, I think everybody should read those because my question is, why were they left out? Why? Now, people
Also,
will
why
be,
not? You know, like why not read them? Do you know what I mean? Like even
hmm,
even if you're opposed to them, I mean the argument as to why they were left out is that they do not have the same. Like, so, for example, the Gospel of Judas, I think it was, it doesn't have the same biblical language. I think it came from like a Gnostic sect of Christianity as opposed to the same line, if that makes sense. So it
yeah,
didn't fit with the
doesn't fit their narrative. And that's kind of my argument. I think that's a
yeah.
decision we should be given the right to make, that it shouldn't be made by people who believe that they have been put here to decide what we can and can't understand or comprehend, and that we are old enough and intelligent enough to make our own decisions, and like you mentioned, Christianity and the Muslim faith. I was brought up as a Christian, but my father's background is Roman Catholic. My wife's Muslim. My mother's father was Jewish. So we've got it all going on here. And I think that everybody has the right to choose what faith they wish to follow, and the right to decide who God or what God is in their own mind. But I draw a line when someone tries to force their opinions and views onto other people.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's not a natural thing then, is it? Like if you have to force your views or opinions on someone, or if you can, for example, sit as a Christian and like listen to a Muslim's worldview and respect it, then your worldview doesn't really hold a lot of weight, you know, because you should be open to question, you should be open to other ideas. It's not, you know, if you're that resolute in your faith, what's the problem? Have a discussion, have a chat, you know.
well, I think we're supposed to hate each other, aren't we? And I think religion has been used, it's been hijacked, and it's been used as a way to divide and conquer. If you can put people into different groups where they actually ultimately all believe the same thing, but in different ways, and get us to not like each other's viewpoint, then it's a brilliant way of controlling. And this is a Roman tactic, isn't it? Divide and conquer. And they're doing it now. And like my wife, obviously being Muslim, she says that, you know, Jesus is in our Bible. You know, we're talking about the same stuff. You know, we're on the same side. You know, why are we fighting? We're fighting because the system wants us to. And I think that if you look at the Tony Blair Faith Foundation, he's been pushing for a very long time for one world religion. And I think that what we're seeing right now, in different ways, through immigration, through the attacks that we've had, are all kind of instrumental in ending religion as we know it, where it becomes, and I've heard many people say this over the years, all religion causes is pain and suffering. It didn't. It does now, because they've infiltrated it and they're
It's been
using it as a
hijacked and
tool.
it's been bastardized, yeah. And I
Yeah.
don't think one world ecumenical religion is the answer either, because the beauty of culture and the beauty of the world is there's so many differences and nuances, and they've just divided us amongst those lines as opposed to like celebrating them.
Yeah, I mean, even Genghis Khan allowed the practice of any religion without persecution or ridicule. And we've been brought up to believe he was some warmongering lunatic. It's the people in charge now that are that. The same old faces. So I think that people should have the right to believe whatever they want. But as I said earlier on, I found reading the Epic of Gilgamesh really interesting because I'm reading the same stories. Now, whether or not it was a misdirection, that it was put there on purpose, and that all the carbon dating and everything
Still has
is
value.
fake. Yeah, it does. But the story of the flood and the story of more intelligent beings coming to warn of a flood, that repeats itself through lots of different cultures across the earth, cultures that never actually interacted with each other. So I think the message and the story appears to be true, but it's been watered down, badly translated. And I'm sure that if we were to be able to get the very first Bible ever written, as we know it, our version of it, but the very first one, I bet you that's a very different read to what we're giving out in church today. I bet that there are things that they just didn't want anybody to know. And I think that, again, that we have a right to read that one and decide for ourselves, not to
Yeah,
write
well, I
something
mean,
that's in favour of a divine ruler sat on a throne here in Britain.
the Bible at a time was feared by empires because it was such a radical, book. But clearly, it's been watered down in the either the book has been watered down or the remnant has been watered down. One of the two, but
Yeah,
it's certainly the radical or the rebellious Christian does not longer seem to exist,
no.
or certainly in very few cases. But sticking on track, they've obviously with hiding this knowledge that gives them power because they have access to technologies that we won't have access to. They've controlled our narrative, therefore controlling the limitations of our world, the limitations of our mind, what it's capable itself. I believe we're capable of a lot more. For example, like wearing rubber soles all the time. I think we're meant to be connected to the earth, to be grounded, and I know that all sounds like new age stuff, and it's not. It's the earth. It's natural. It's we're not meant to be this removed from nature, and I think that's what that prior empire had was how to live at one with harmoniously and use nature as as a tool as opposed to being destructive to it.
I totally agree with you. I think that we are considered to be batteries, that we're walking batteries, and we are living on a circuit board, and this can be described as ley lines. And I think there's no better example of how the parasites and the system perceives us than if you're ever in a situation where you've got to go to court and you're going to prison. You're charged, and then you're placed in a cell. And I think that that's a demonstration of your energy being your whole life blood, your energy being absorbed and taken away by the system, if you like. And I do believe that. And if you look at how Tartarian's built, if you look at star forts, and anyone who's interested in Tartaria should have a look at star forts. There's one just off the coast of Dublin, which is an island. It was at one point a monastery, Spike Island, it's called. That's worth people going if they can get to it, and that's worth having
Yeah.
a look at. And they resonate at 432 hertz, and even the Smithsonian's Institute in America say they have no understanding why all of the star forts in America and across the world resonate at 432 hertz. Why do they align with constellations? If the backstory of a star fort is that it's a defensive fortress, why does it resonate at 432 hertz, the same frequency that all living matter and the Earth itself vibrates at? And why
Yeah.
does it need to align to constellations? How does that help in a battle? So they understood harmonics, frequency. They understood cymatics and the
Well, I
importance of
feel
living
that's
in
how they're
harmony
built
and
as well.
balance. Sorry?
We look at these mad buildings that we could never recreate today. I mean, I think those blocks and those mad structures were moved with frequency and sound, and
Yeah, I think so.
I think potentially like laser precision cuts of stone. It looks like, because the perfection is like you can't even get a bit of paper in between some of the work, and there's no concrete, some of the buildings as well.
No.
It's mad, like.
I totally agree. And I think that that's been suppressed. I think that the technology we have now, the ability for us to speak as we are, and the fact that we've got what is now basically a piece of glass with some tech inside it that enables us to do our banking, to watch a film, do whatever we really control our whole lives from this little smartphone. And all of this we consider to be incredible technology, and we consider ourselves to be so much more advanced. But it's the wrong technology. Whereas before we were harnessing energy naturally, and that's what they believe. Obviously, I'm sure everybody watching this is probably aware that they're now coming to terms with the fact that the pyramids in Egypt, in particular the Great Pyramid of Giza, was harnessing energy from the ether, free, clean energy that has no cost to anybody
Yeah,
that's using it. I mean, that's technology that's worth having, isn't it? Not the
yeah, and I
latest
think the
smartphone, smart
signals,
meter, and
like the signals that are flying about with the technology that we currently use, I believe causes like agitation and different sorts of problems. Like there is lots of studies to show like wireless contamination and behavioral problems as a side effect of that. And I mean, there's just so much. I'm not going down like a 5G conspiracy route here. I'm just saying in general, wireless
no, I'm on
technology has
board.
been shown. Yeah,
I'm totally on board with you. Yeah, and I think that whenever I hear the word smart, it worries me. We've got
well,
smart
it's the
motorways
inversion.
here now.
Everything's the inversion. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah, and I know people that put their that don't use a microwave oven, but still own one. They maybe bought it years and years ago, but have stopped using it, and they'll put their mobile phones in there at night and turn their Wi-Fi off. They've refused to have a smart meter fitted. They're being very careful and reducing the EMF as much as they possibly can. But we know that once we go outside, we're hit with this, and we've seen, a lot of us will have seen what they can do with these masks and what they can do with frequency at the right level. We can drop down on the floor paralyzed.
After experiencing what we went through in COVID 2020 to whatever, like, do you honestly think it's possible for enough people to wake up when we've seen how stupid people were?
No, I don't. I'm a kind of, to an extent, I'm a believer in Dolores Cannon's theory that she said 80% of the world are soulless. They're born without a soul. And I don't believe that. I think that everything has a soul. Every living creature has a connection to the source, the
It's
creator.
activated.
Yeah, but I think if we look at the possibility that 80% of the public, 80% of the population right now descend from a cloning exercise that took place in the 1800s, then perhaps it isn't the fact that they don't have a connection. Perhaps the problem is that they're not carrying the memory of their ancestors in their DNA, and we are.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're awake. We know this isn't how we're supposed to live. We know this is all wrong because it's inbuilt. But if you were born with, in the 1800s with no ancestors, and even scientists will say that memory is carried in DNA. So I'm not this isn't just a theory. If we've got this coursing through us, this kind of inbuilt knowing that everything around us is wrong and we're not supposed to live like this, then it all starts to make sense. That
Very
this
much
is
so.
Yeah. So I think that that's the underlying issue. The fact that perhaps, according to Dolores Cannon's figures, and lots of other people have said the same thing, 80% of people out there right now, what we today would call NPCs, which I think is a little bit harsh, can't be woken up because
Mm.
it's not inbuilt that there's something wrong. and it might take something traumatic in their lives to push them to fully accept there's something going wrong. And most will just go about their day and disagree with things, but still go and vote, still roll up their
I don't
sleeve, and
know.
it doesn't matter what you do.
I agree. I agree with
Sorry,
that. Yeah, like I mean,
I'm so
don't
sorry.
worry.
There's someone banging on my door. I won't be a second. Sorry about this.
No worries. No worries.
Surprised you couldn't hear it. Asking me if I'd booked a taxi.
Right. That's a weird one.
Well, that's different. I
Maybe a
haven't had that before.
Jesuit infiltrator.
Very, very strange. Yeah.
So going back to what you were saying there, like that, like theoretically that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, if there was a like full generation born out of cloning, there's just no like ancestral ties in the blood. There's nothing there. And yeah, as you say, yes, NPCs is a bit harsh. We have came on a few generations from then, so it's maybe not so harsh now. But like whenever you look at people who think they're being radical and different these days, but yet they hold the same views and alignments that multinational corporations and governments do.
Yeah, I totally
Would
agree.
would you not be asking yourself, is that really counterculture? Is that really progressive, or
I remember Ricky Gervais once being attacked. I know he's quite outspoken on his on his Twitter, or what is now X, but this was back in the Twitter days. He'd said something, and someone was complaining about something he had said, and he replied to them saying, "Why don't you tweet about this using your phone made in a sweatshop in China by a child who sleeps on the floor?" And I think that that's the problem. I've had people say to me, "Why do you sell your books on Amazon? You're supporting Amazon." And my answer has been always the same. One, no one else would publish it. No one would touch it, what I wrote about in my first book. And secondly, not the second one. But secondly, I don't support Amazon. They pay me.
yeah,
And
and how
and
the hell do you
and I,
distribute it internationally? Like the shipping costs if you're
exactly.
not doing it through Amazon, like it's an unfortunate necessary evil, and
It is.
we can be local to a certain degree, but when it's the likes of an author or an artist or somebody who wants to be international, you're going to have to deal with these international businesses. It's an impossibility, especially books.
Yeah.
Amazon have the monopoly on distribution. So
It's
why
kind of
would
how
you
he
not?
started out, isn't it? It was originally a second-hand book online retailer, wasn't it? But my argument is that if we are going to break away completely from the system and stop supporting any organization involved with the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, and anyone connected then to these families and these people, then life becomes right now impossible, because that would mean, where do you go for fuel? Where would you fill up for fuel for your car? How are you going to communicate if you throw your phone away? So we've all got to dip in and dip out, but I think we can still make choices to not support companies associated with them unless we have no alternative. And that's
Yeah,
kind of
and I
where
think
I am.
people are fantastic at pontificating and like useless with
Mm,
solutions, and
yeah,
that's why I like very much James Corbett's channel. He has a like deep dive on certain issues, and then he has a series called Solutions Watch. So like there is different aspects of, as you say, we can't escape the system, but like certainly we can control our agreement to it, and how much we participate within it to a degree. But we're never going to be able to operate fully outside of it. It's if we want any form of
I
comfortable life.
I think that's the idea, isn't it? That it would be impossible. I had a funny conversation with someone the other day, and it was through Facebook, and they said that they were completely off grid. They weren't in the system anymore. They were outside of it. They had no
On
connection with the
Facebook.
system whatsoever. And I replied saying, you do know we're talking on Facebook, don't you? That doesn't make any sense. And I had another author saying to me that he wouldn't have personally used Amazon. He would have found an alternative, and that's what he's going to do. He's going to use a local publisher, and then you'll only be able to buy his books through his website. And I said to him, do you mind me asking how you wrote your books? Was it pen and paper or a typewriter? And he said, well, no, I used my PC. I said, who's your PC made by? And he said, well, Hewlett Packard. I said, your printer's Hewlett Packard as well? Yeah, I said, you do know that they're one of the main supporters of the World Economic Forum, and you're giving them money every time you use their product or buy a new printer cartridge, if it's an original one. And he said, well, that's different. I said, no, it isn't different. You're saying that you won't support any company involved with the World Economic Forum, and then you're using companies involved in the World Economic Forum. And incidentally, you're using a Samsung smartphone.
Yeah, like the people who died on the hill of the free man of the land, sovereign being stuff. That was an insane time where people were trying to say they can travel without driver's licenses, and maybe within common law their argument was entirely correct. But why on earth are you wanting to live with such friction in your life? It's there's easier ways to get by. We can have an inquisitive mind, and if we notice something and we see it's inherently evil, by all means, do not participate. It's that simple. Change the channel.
Yeah, I encourage people to stop watching the news, and that the information, if it's important enough, you'll get it through different ways. But if you stop watching the news, stop buying the newspapers, stop listening to the radio, then you're not involved in propaganda that's being put out there by government or by government-backed organisations. Yeah. Over here, obviously, the BBC is probably the biggest example of that. And then we've got Radio 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Switch off, don't engage. And, and I won't vote because it's two cheeks of the same arse. And occasionally you'll have a sphincter arrive fresh on the scene like Nigel Farage. It's still encouraging you to participate in something where no one cares what you vote for anyway. Nothing's going to change.
If everybody believes that they're actually, so carefully counted, how can you participate in that system? I don't understand people like my parents who've participated for say 7 decades now onward in this system, and they would still lose your vote, lose your voice in this thing. You have lived a life of the constant lies and resets, and weapons of mass destruction here, babies thrown out of incubators in Kuwait there, and come on, they've never been legit. So why are you engaging?
Yeah, the people have this funny argument that if you don't vote, then you don't have a right to speak out about it. But I think it's actually
that's you exercising your right. That's you exercising your right. But you're not engaging in that absolute farcity of a system. Is you engaging in your absolute right of freedom? Because that's informed consent. That's you giving them your consent to continue on with the system. It's a farce.
I agree. I just think that if you voted here in England, if you voted for Labour, you got what you asked for. Okay, great. Well, you now can't complain. You don't have a right to complain. You voted this arsehole in. You've now got to live with your decision. If you voted for a different side, okay, you could say, well, you can now say, well, we didn't want him in anyway. We voted against him. You've got I suppose, an argument. You can justify it. But I think the people that have the right
against us.
Yeah, and I think the people that have the biggest right to stand up and say it's all a load of old bollocks are the people that don't vote. because we're the only ones that have taken a stance on it. We don't believe in how the system works. We know the votes aren't counted and that they're puppets anyway. And as Shakespeare said, it's all a theatre. It's just, and that's why we have acts of parliament. It's just stage and theatre. And if you think about, if you were to watch a live debate, a live broadcast from the Houses of Parliament, and they're arguing the toss over something or other, what happens at the end of that argument to change what's going on? Does that argument where someone says, you said this and you've done this and you haven't done that, and what are you going to do about this? At the end of it, they go to the bar, they have a drink, they can still smoke in there, and that's it. Job done. Nothing changes. It's just a joke. It's a play. And to participate in it just seems totally pointless. I think if we all stopped voting, they wouldn't be able to form a government. And that's got to be the way to do this.
Yeah, but this goes back to the same thing. Any hope that I had pre-COVID disappeared from COVID, because if you had said during that time, if you stick one finger up your arse and bounce on one leg, and that will give you a 75% less chance of catching COVID, you would have seen many people doing that. And that's where humanity's at, and I ain't got the faith in us anymore. So I think there's a few out there. There's a few out there that still have hope and still have and as I said earlier, all this knowledge is worth nothing if it's just masturbation. So if it has to be leading somewhere, there has to be an end in sight, and that is freedom, and that for me would be Jesus, the freedom of the Bible. And all these things have done for me is just confirm exactly that we are being lied to. Nothing about this world is pure. It's seeped in darkness. At the highest echelons of it, they're provably sacrificing children. It's insanity.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, well, have you heard that? I'm sure you have. A lot of people have said, what if the COVID outbreak and then the subsequent medical intervention was an intelligence test? What if that was designed to see who's awake and who isn't? And that maybe at the end of this period, Satan's little season, at the end of this, that the people that are going to move on and perhaps be in a slightly higher frequency or vibration are the only ones that really can. And they're the ones that see through all of this, that know, as I said earlier on, that this isn't how we're supposed to live. And that rolling up your sleeve, and as one of my wife's colleagues' wives have just done, taken their 11th booster. I mean, what if the purpose of this is to remove certain people because they can't come with us next? That if they were greeted by what we would consider to be God, or a being from somewhere else that looks very different to us, would, and it's perhaps more so in America, would the first thing be to reach for your firearm and shoot at it? Or would our reaction, perhaps people watching this, would maybe be more likely to welcome them and say, we always thought there was something else, and here you are, talk to me, this is amazing. Maybe it's only us that are able to do that.
I feel that it was too nefarious of a plan for that to be the outcome. And I think, if this being that you're suggesting was at the other side, would not have that as the instrument for his people to gather. It seems a very cathartic and evil thing to do, to get put people into such mass deception and get them injected with DNA altering substances and fetal tissues and all sorts of I think it's a bit of a stretch, so we say that would be the method that anybody at the top in any way, shape or form would be wanting to bring any of us to the other side anyway.
This isn't my theory. I'm sort of repeating one that I hear, and I've heard it quite a few times, and they're saying that good guys, what they refer to as white hats, have infiltrated everywhere. they're at the top, and
Yeah.
they did this as an intelligence
These are
test.
the
It's not something I
QAnon
believe.
types.
Yeah,
These are QAnon
maybe. I'm not
types.
sure about
Yeah.
that. It's a father and son kind of team, isn't it? I can't remember their names, but and their references, that this is the Great Flood. If they're prepared to wipe out almost everybody and everything from the face of the earth, then why wouldn't they do that again? And how many times have they done that? So it's kind of, you could say the Great Flood is a nefarious thing, but I don't know. I personally think it was designed to get rid of the human population, but very slowly. So it wasn't immediate. You imagine if you took the first jab and people dropped down dead, or did within 24 hours, 48 hours. I think it was designed to be a slow burn that attacked our immune system and possibly works with 5G. That's my own belief. But as I was saying, there are people out there that think that this was an intelligence test. Now, I can't go along with that because, my own son, my eldest son, took it because he was trapped in Australia and wasn't allowed to leave. Now, that
Yeah.
wasn't an intelligence test for him. That was no choice. He had to come home, and he couldn't.
Well, a lot of
So,
people were left in that position as
yeah,
well.
absolutely lost their jobs over it, and so it wasn't, as
And
far as
they,
I can see, an
they said
intelligence
there was
test.
no, we're not making you comply, but if you don't do it, you'll not have access to this, you'll not have access to that. But as you say, the scary thing is that there's people still on their 9th, their 10th, their 11th, even though the facts, the figures, the mainstream stage of that is the play have even now admitted that there was mass spikes of death, myocarditis, AstraZeneca, blood clots, all these things. And why are these things revealed as well to us? It's all very strange, as well, like Donald Trump pretending to be a white hat and then just being Benjamin Netanyahu's bitch for his entire time in office. And that was always going to happen when his funders were who they were. It's he's bought and paid for. And people
Absolutely.
put your hope in anybody that's in that position is insane. That's why I think it's a spiritual battle that we're in, and it's, as it says, we're fighting against powers and principalities of good and evil, and it's more evident now than ever because I don't know if you heard that poem that Donald Trump read out in his first term about the snake. I am the snake. Oh, little woman, please take me in. And then it ends with the snake bit her and she was dying. It's turns around why did you do this to me, snake? I took you in. And she says, you knew I was a snake from the day I took you in. Basically telling you in the form of a poem that he's a fucking snake. To tell you everything is done in plain sight. And, I think, yes, by all means, we do need to inform ourselves and continue to get knowledge where we can, where it's beneficial. But when it becomes just knowledge for the sake of knowledge and it's not leading to anywhere, we're in their game then too, aren't we? We're just chasing our tail, and we're still not sparsely in touch with what we're supposed to be in touch with. Or it's just another distraction. It may not be notifications on the phone. It may not be the television. It's just a perpetual cycle of conspiracy research, and at least with yourself, you've actually got to some answers, and now because you sort of specialize in that field, you're in a perpetual motion of talking about it, so that's a wee bit different. But I know me individually, I've got lost in rabbit holes of gematria and Tartaria and cloning, and you name it. I've lost until I actually went this is actually just another distraction as well.
That's the problem, isn't it? And I think a lot of them are thrown out there for that. I mean, there are lots of things that you could dedicate the rest of your life to researching and never get anywhere. Is it a flat earth? Is it a spinning ball? What's beyond the ice walls? What really happens in Antarctica? Are UFOs up
But why
there,
are
or are they coming
people,
from underwater?
these people that are doing all these researches, like I for years was like, would never have thought, like, even though brought up in the Christian background, would never have just like thought, am I doing all this searching because maybe, like, there's something spiritually missing, like maybe there is a truth to, like, becoming a Christian, or maybe that does fill a void that would stop that searching. You know, maybe there is truth to that, and I think there's a lot of truth to that, because when you go down these rabbit holes and it is just searching, you're in the same cycle as what we think is like a higher plane. It's the same plane, just a different side. We're still distracted, we're still lost, we're still not getting any closer to the creator, to the truth. We're just constantly searching, whereas the other side just aren't doing anything. It's like different sides of the same vibration.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've always wanted to know things we're not supposed to, from my childhood, and
Who
it
doesn't?
seems to be, well, that's my argument, I suppose. As soon as the pandemic started, my first thought was, at the time my wife and I owned a tattoo studio. I've been tattooist for years. I retired a year ago. Why are they shutting us down? Because we wear face masks sometimes anyway, especially if one of us has got a cold or we're tattooing near someone's face, so we're not sort of breathing all over them. So we already had a huge supply of face masks, and we disinfected everything every day. So my argument was, and we had air conditioning. We were constantly running. So our air was clean, the surfaces, the floor was clean, we had masks there. I would have said that we were cleaner than your GP's surgery, perhaps even cleaner than your dentist. So why did we shut? So I questioned it right at the very start. And then obviously we didn't comply to anything. And my wife and I went into London and we started having a snoop around there. And it was weird seeing it so empty, walking through Battersea Park. There's no one around. We went into the city, and there we saw some Chinese companies and some Chinese work people installing masts. And they said that it was because they wanted people that were working from home now to be able to have a faster connection and a better connection to the internet so they could work from home. And my answer to that was, anybody who had the ability to work from home probably already had broadband. So that doesn't make sense. And the 5G mast went up faster than any cure or supposed cure was made available. So I smelt a rat early on. And I couldn't understand why so many other people didn't. And still today they don't, and they're not questioning these things. And all I can conclude is that it's not built in them to do that. They just don't think like we do. And I don't know what it would take. You could,
No, well, I
but
think you never lost your childhood curiosity, and we call it childhood curiosity. I think it's a lifelong curiosity, and it's supposed to be for
mm,
everybody. I just think it shuts off for some and doesn't for others, and some people have obviously a greater intellectual ability to go greater into research than others. But I think it all comes down to curiosity and having that shut off, and that's what the whole system is about, to shut that off within us and to just like remove all meaning from life, really.
that kind of starts at school, doesn't it? Where you're kind of almost told to stop imagining things, and you've got to follow a very strict curriculum where you can't question anything because you'll fail an exam unless you repeat verbatim exactly what's been instilled. And I think that that's also connected with the pineal gland, the calcification of it, perhaps flew through things like fluoride, that our ability to perhaps be more telepathic, to be able to think differently, is almost, by the time we move on to secondary school, long gone. I think it probably, by the time we get to 9 or 10 years old, it's pretty much over. And we become obedient. And we know that if we want to get we're told if we want to get a good job and get on in life, we're going to have to go to university. Well, that's just regurgitating exactly what the narrative has told you. You can't take I couldn't take a history exam, history during the 1700s, and expect to get a degree in it if I start saying it's all a lie and write about something else, Tartaria. I'm going to fail. And I think that that's the idea of education, and it's also mass
It's
programming through what we
indoctrination.
watch. Yeah, it is, and through TV, through the media too. I think that we are programmed from the moment we can understand,
Well, that's called
and our
TV
language
programming.
too. Yeah, but
TV
our language
programming
too.
to tell us, yeah. Like good
Oh yeah,
morning,
sort of.
you're always in the morning.
Yeah,
Like
morning.
all of the English language
Antibiotics.
is it's
Antibiotic, I
all
think, is a brilliant one. Very clever. To antibiotic against humanity, against human life. And there it is right in front of you. Yet we'll queue up to get some because we don't feel very well and don't want to look at perhaps finding a natural remedy to whatever the problem is, or getting the right amount of sleep or exposure to sunlight, or whatever we need to do. We'll just reach for some tablets that have the clue in Latin on the cover.
well.
It's
There's one
everywhere.
you just brought up. Whenever my wife first met me and we went on our first holidays, I wasn't putting sun cream on. Never have, never will. I said, why not? And I said, well, because I fully believe that sunscreen is the skin cancer causer. Because why on earth would the giver of life be detrimental to you? Like, obviously, too much exposure to it, you know when to go in and when to go out of it. But how on earth can be receiving vitamin D through your skin be a bad thing? Like, why would you want to block it? There's a reason behind all this. Even tobacco at its purest form was actually good for you. It coated your lungs. It was able to get rid of mold and mildew, certain illnesses from your lungs. But then they tampered with that, and it's there's so many rabbit holes and so many deceptions and so many dark turns in history. Like, if you can't see you're being deceived and being lied to and still have any faith in the system, there's not really a lot of hope. The people that are watching this or the people that are going to watch this, you're not going to be able to persuade your friend that this is the case. They'll want to go out and listen to fucking whatever's the latest now. I'm so shut off from popular culture, to be honest, but it's just people are who they are. You're not going to change that. It's unfortunately people are awake or they're not, and I do think it does come down to curiosity. You weren't able to shut my curiosity off. When people tried in school, like, were trying to put me in their box, I fought against it. I was seen as a problem child or whatever, and even still I have my issues with courts, etc. But I don't like to be told what I can and cannot do. Like, I'm an autonomous and sovereign being, but if your laws are your laws, I'll take the consequences, but I'm still going to do what I want to do.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that a lot of people that are what we would call awake are the ones that stared out the window at school. It just didn't seem to make sense. We thought a lot of it was pointless. And I think that's the difference. I think you had people in there that absorbed it all, and they knew that they were going to have to pass because they wanted to go all the way. They wanted to go to university, sixth form first and so on. And then you had people who just weren't on board or weren't even all there, that just messed around and bunked off and whatever. And then you've got the people that had the ability on paper to pass all of these exams, but always had, could have done better, lacks interest, no effort. And I think that that's probably the majority of the people that are what we would call awake.
Yeah, why would you put the effort into something? This was always my argument when the report card came around. It's like, why would I put my effort into something that requires zero fucking effort? All you're asking me to do is remember and regurgitate, and I'm able to do that with zero effort. So I'm not putting any additional, you know what I mean? Like, I was passing the exams. I wasn't getting A stars or anything, but I was getting the grades that kept me in the top class or whatever. So, like, why on earth would I make additional effort if I can get by on listening, taking it in and regurgitating? That's exactly what the whole education system is based on anyway. So, like,
yeah, I totally agree.
Absolute farce. And like, when you leave school, I've learned so much more and understood so much more since leaving school, because the things that I've wanted to learn about has been a desire and not not something that's been forced upon me, and not something that's been falsified. I've been able to look at all sources and not just one source, and
a friend of mine, he runs a residential care home for very, very vulnerable children. They are one moment away from actually being imprisoned. They're very violent. They're usually involved in county lines. And he said something that has always resonated with me, and that you can get qualifications in childcare, MVQ, working with children in children's homes, kids in the system, if you like. And he said that you can get from NVQ level 1 up to NVQ level 5. And that after someone's worked in his company, which is a council, Somerset County Council here in southwest of England, once you get to level 3, you can then go on and apply to be a deputy manager, and you can start progressing once you've got your level 3. And he said the irony is that although that's how the company and the system works, he would rather have someone with 1 month's experience working in a secure children's home than somebody who had all the way up to NVQ level 5 in it. He said because ultimately it doesn't matter what you learn in a classroom. There's no substitute for sticking somebody in a home with children that want to beat you up and set fire to the place. That is where the real experience and knowledge comes from, doing the job rather than writing about it.
100%. The most impactful drugs talk we ever had in school was by an ex-drug addict, and he really brought you into the stories of the drugs, let you like experience the funny times of it. He didn't like, it wasn't all bad, but like he really brought the point home, and the like what it had stripped away from his life any more than a book or somebody that had just read the information from a book could have done. Life experience is worth 1,000 times more than learnt read experience.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's no substitute for the real thing.
Well, Joe, it's been hilarious. I don't think we've really actually discussed much about Tartaria, Cabbage Patch Kids, or Orphan Train. So maybe we'll do another one. I've just actually enjoyed chatting with you, to be fair.
What you could do is just put a link to my website at the bottom and say if anyone wants to know anything, message him through his website, and we'll carry on talking about whatever we want to talk about instead.
Yeah, so I'll actually just put like a collaborator link on the video as well, and then so that's a direct link through to your site as well.
Yeah, sure.
And yeah, I would like to have another chat because there's plenty of other things we could talk about as well. Clearly it wasn't meant to be kind of Cabbage Patch Kids, but it has been fantastic talking to you, and
and you
for coming on today.
Thanks for having me on.
And I'll get in touch in emails, sure, and we'll set something else up.
Sounds good to me.
And thank you. All the best.
It's a pleasure.
And you have a good day.
Yeah, right, thank you, and you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Not here to make you happy, not here to make you sad. Your feelings are irrelevant when debates are to be had. The Belfast Bapcast, loud and clear, covering the topics others fear, Working overtime to bring you many stories, waking up today the same labor and Tories. A stage, it isn't our part to play, is bringing you knowledge in this way. No filter, no fuss, just tell unfiltered fact, much like the words on those Christian tracks.